So welcome everybody. I'm sure we're going to have more people joining us. It's a difficult time of day, 6 o'clock in Geneva, but last time we started with a few people and then we were we were over 50, I think, at the last panel discussion. Um, I'm really honored to be actually moderating this panel. This is a second of our pre-conference panels leading up to our conference on the 3rd of October on women at the front line of climate action and climate innovation. And I think that for me, this panel is the essence and represents the meaning of what it is to be at the front line of climate action and innovation. So we're very, very honored to have this really interesting and experienced and knowledgeable group of women who will really represent what, as I said, is the essence of our conference. Our conference is a conference of hope and action. So although we are bombarded with very difficult news around the climate situation, flooding, fires, all over the world, there is also conflict. Conflict creates also terrible pollution as well as the human lives that are lost. But we have to stay positive and we have to stay relevant. And we also have to stay aware of the fact that we all can make a difference. And we're going to hear today from these four incredible women about how they are making a difference in helping to mitigate and to adapt to the climate crisis, but also how they support other women on the ground to do so. So welcome to everybody. And we're going to cover quite a few issues today, everything from livelihoods to education to energy. These are all things that are going to be touched today. But I think what's really important, and I think this is one of the things that we are very grateful, particularly to Alice and to Fiesta, who will talk to us about the importance of leadership from local communities, and particularly the leadership of women. So this is going to be the kind of unifying aspect of the conversation today. So I would like to start by each one of our speakers will tell us who they are and what brought them, what motivated them to the work that they have been doing. We're going to start with Alice Ruhweza, who is the Senior Director, Policy Influence and Engagement Africa, Asia Pacific, and Europe and North Africa Country Office of you're with WWF. Oh, yes, WWF. I hadn't put that bit in. We've been struggling with getting the right titles for our speakers because they keep changing. So I just got this this title sent to me today. And we're going to start with Alice, because Alex has a very global experience over many, many years about how you develop leadership and how you actually face the challenges of the climate crisis and the environmental crisis. So Alice, I'm asking you to start and tell us your story.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining. So I'm Alice Ruhweza. I am Ugandan. I am a mother, a sister. And as Atalanti said, I work for the Worldwide Fund for Nature as a Senior Director for Policy Influence and Engagement. And what that means is I work closely with our country offices to strengthen their influence and engagement in their countries and in the regions. So I was born in a family of many women. We are actually 8 girls, 8 girls in my family, and just a few boys. And the message that my parents, by the way, my father was a wildlife biologist. So he was very strong in wildlife. He was the first post-colonial head of protected areas in Uganda. And my mom was a community development officer. So there was a lot of that nature and wildlife interest and community interest going on already. But the big thing that they pushed very much, and because we were girls, was education. Both of them, and particularly my father, had come from a time when girls didn't go to school. And he, as a man, had been favored and he'd gone to school. And he said he had seen the advantages that women have when they go to school. So he felt that having 8 girls, his mantra was, you have to go to school. And my mother also came from a big family of girls, and her father was a staunch supporter of education. But growing up, you take this for granted. When you hear them saying you should do your homework, you should do this, it feels like a chore. And it didn't hit me until I joined a global voyage of women leaders going to Antarctica in 2018. And this was a voyage that had been organized to really advocate for the strong role that women should play in climate change and in climate leadership. And they forced us on that voyage to really think about the why of our existence. They told us to really think about why we do what we do and what our story is. And for me, I was the only African on that voyage. And that struck me as something to think about. How has this come about? How come I'm the only one on this very prestigious 3-week voyage to Antarctica? And in my reflection, it really occurred. I really realized that investment that my parents had put in me on education had really been a door opener, just like they said that it would be a door opener. And when I came back from Antarctica, I said to myself, you need to do something more about education, and you need to do something more about girl education. And just looking around and finding that 52 million girls were out of school and what we were losing by that, and looking at the Project Drawdown study that just came out at the time talking about women and the role that women and girl education would play in climate change, I was forced to really start thinking about that. And I'll stop there for now, and I'll talk more later about that. Over. I think you're muted, Atalanti. You're muted. Yeah.
I would like you, Alice, just to say a few words about what you're doing right now, about your work, and then we'll go into more detail.
About what I'm doing in my current work. Yeah.
Yes, just a little bit about your career, how you worked in the Solomon Islands, and all those things. Was that you?
No, that wasn't me. I think that wasn't me.
Oh, that wasn't you. Okay.
That wasn't me.
Okay.
Mine was more on the girl education work.
The girl education. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then we'll go into more detail about the girl education at the next moment.
Yes.
I'd like to bring in Zuna now. Aminath Zuna, who we call Zuna, and she comes from the Maldives, and she's a co-founder of Salted Ventures Swimmers. And Zuna, can you tell us a little bit about your story, what you do, why you do it, and a little bit about the impact of what you're doing beyond just this, because it goes much further than just learning to swim.
Thank you for this amazing opportunity. I'm Zuna. I am a mother of 3 children. My passion for the ocean was sparked at a young age when my father taught me to swim. I was a competitive swimmer when I was at school, and my dad is from the capital city of the Maldives called Male, and my mother is from another island called Midu, and we would visit Midu on school holidays, and I had the privilege to teach some of my cousins, younger sisters and friends to swim and snorkel with little that I knew back then when I was a child myself. And in these moments, I learned that I had a natural instinct for helping others to stay calm and to help them overcome their fear of the ocean while they were learning to swim. And I've always wanted to learn more and the proper ways to teach someone to swim, and this desire grew more when I had my own children. And my father was a dive master back then when I was a child, and when there were a handful of people in that who chose that profession in the Maldives. And him being this awesome person, he would equip us with snorkel gears, and I had the joy of sharing these equipments when I visited my mother's island for the school holidays with my cousins and their friends. And I
So you were saying how you had told me
yeah,
about how, yeah.
for most of the children who I got to share these equipments, it was the first time they got to experience the sea. They got to see what the underwater beauty holds. And even as a child, I could see how this experience sparked a deep desire in those children, and how we talked about how we need to protect this. And unfortunately, that connection was tested when a harbor development was
They threatened, yeah.
yeah, the project threatened the precious ecosystems of the reef. And then my younger sister Tatung, who had the opportunity to and who I had the opportunity to teach her swimming, took the initiative to create a petition against the construction. But despite her passionate effort, the project went ahead, and her commitment to advocate for the marine ecosystem inspired my cousin Ire, who I had the joy of enjoying lots of snorkeling sessions when we were children. And when plans emerged to extend the harbor, Ire informed the women in her community about the potential impacts of how they would be how the women in the community will be adversely affected by it. And to her surprise, a great number of women attended the meeting than she anticipated.
And I think that this was a turning point for you because you'd been
Yeah,
of swimming and then you completely changed your course.
yeah, these experiences made a huge impact on who I am today. Like it instilled a drive within me to advocate for and protect the marine ecosystems threatened by development. And I am now a swim and snorkel instructor trainer, and I am the co-founder of Salt Adventure Swimmers. It's a swim school based in the capital city, Male, and our classes aims to build skills and confidence while fostering a deep connection to the ocean, its marine life, and encouraging marine citizenship among the participants. And in addition to my work on Salt Adventure Swimmers, I'm also co-leading the Ocean Women Project with Flossie Barad from the Manta Trust. And the Maldives is an island nation of about 1,200 islands, of which 200 islands are inhabited, which covers across 90,000 kilometers, with 99% water and only 1% land. And only in the capital city, Male, swim lessons are available for anyone who'd like to learn to swim. It's not the same case elsewhere in the rest of the islands. And I got the opportunity to work on Ocean Women Project while I was brainstorming ways to help the much needed communities in those islands, to help them find ways and means to learn to swim, and get them the opportunity to connect with the ocean.
Thank you. And it's really interesting. And we'll come back to the impact of learning how to swim, and also how when we had our conversation together, how you told me, Zuna, that the development of the Maldives into a tourist destination meant that often the women who had in the past learned how to swim were not swimming, and that it's only through swimming that that desire to protect the land, the sea, became very strong. So we'll come back to that. So thank you so much for telling us your story. I'd like now to move to Qandeel, who is from Pakistan. She is the founder of Solar for Her. And throughout this, we see a thread of the importance of education in different ways, learning how to swim, educating for leadership and understanding. And now we'll come to Qandeel, who will tell us about her incredible initiative in Pakistan.
Thank you so much, Atalanti, and thank you so much to the team of Giving Women who invited us all to share our stories. I am Qandeel. I am from Pakistan, and right now I am doing PhD in renewable energy engineering, and in parallel I am doing some volunteer work on solarizing girls' schools in rural and remote areas of Pakistan. And this initiative is called Solar for Her. How we came now, you might question that how we came up with this idea. When I was a little girl, my father is a doctor, and he used to get shifted to very remote and rural areas of Pakistan. And mostly in my school, the school where I started studying, there was no electricity. Then I got shifted to another school where there were only two classes and children from 5 grades, and there was no electricity at all, so the classes used to feel like ovens during the hot summer days, and it was very difficult for us to study in that environment. And that's where I learned the importance of facilities in a class. And most of my classmates back then could not continue education because they did not have a strong foundation of knowledge. And I was lucky enough to have educated parents who helped me build that foundation, and I was able to continue education. When I grew up, I had to move to another city with better electricity infrastructure, power infrastructure. And I started my engineering degree in the capital city of Pakistan. After that, I took some break, and I really thought that, just like Alice said, that there's one phase in your life when something really hits you, when you start questioning the system around you. So that was the time when I really started thinking, what motivates me to work? What is the thing that I really want to work on? And that was also because during that time I got separated and I was a single mother, and education was the thing that empowered me during that journey. So I really wanted to do something for women, but I studied SDGs and I really wanted to work on climate change as well. So together with two of my friends who also faced similar situation when they were little, we brainstormed and we came up with the idea of Solar for Her. And now we solarize girls' schools in rural and remote areas of Pakistan where there's no electricity or very less electricity supply. And in such communities, we also facilitate the installers. Solar installers in such areas don't usually have much knowledge about installation. So we arrange online sessions for them to guide them on how to install solar panels. We send high quality equipment from the major cities of Pakistan to those areas because those areas have very defective electrical components. And we try our best to basically facilitate those girls to build a stronger foundation for them. So that's a little bit about me and about the initiative. It is totally like this whole solar PV system. It is free of cost for the school, and the only thing we request from the schools is to keep the system sustainable, maintain the system. Don't just we just request them not to shut it down. Um, Come to us if they are facing any problem. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, and Qandeel, I think what was interesting when we were talking, it was like, on the one hand, you are ensuring that we're not using fossil fuels in electrifying these areas. On the other hand, it was also the effect of climate on these schools, which could you tell us a little bit why that prevented girls from going to school?
Okay, so in rural areas of Pakistan, a general trend is to take out the female students early from the school because they don't see the value in education. So early childhood marriage is very common in such rural areas of Pakistan. If if we provide them enough evidence that this education is going to help them in future, which can be done if we build a stronger foundation, they will be able to like get financially independent in future if they have a stronger foundation. But if they go to school and there's no electricity, the and there are areas where there are only mud huts and no electricity at all, no light bulb, no fan, nothing. So in such areas, the quality of education is so low that students cannot learn anything. So if we provide these little things, the electricity, the light bulb, the fan, the quality of education gets a bit better. And that's how the community starts seeing value in education, and the dropout rate decreases. And also about the climate change, Pakistan's energy mix has about 70% of fossil fuels in its energy mix, and Pakistan is the seventh most vulnerable country to get impacted by climate change. So we need to change our energy mix and move towards more renewables to counter this climate change. We need a strong, rapid renewable energy acceleration. So that is why integrating more renewable energy resources at school level would be helpful for Pakistan in the wider sense as well. We are working on climate change mitigation measures in that sense.
Oh, no, I think it's Qandeel. We lost you for a minute, Qandeel.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay,
Yeah.
so I was talking about the energy mix of Pakistan. There is 70% of energy mix of Pakistan is fossil fuel based. So we need to shift towards more renewable energy resources to basically counter the climate change impacts. Pakistan is the seventh country to get most impacted by the climate change, and that's why we need rapid action. And at school level, if we teach the children about the importance of solar panels, if we install solar panels on school, students students when they see the solar panels, they get interested in knowing the technology. So that's how we are doing the two things at a time. We are installing renewable energy resources make to make our energy mix more dependent on renewables and remove the fossil fuels. And we are trying to raise a generation of these climate activists who know the importance of renewable energy resources.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Qandeel. And now, last but not least, I come to Fiesta, who has an incredible experience globally around women and climate. So I will let you introduce yourself, Fiesta. I've been very lucky. I've had several conversations with all the speakers, so I've heard their stories and they've touched me deeply. So Fiesta, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me start by saying I'm extremely grateful to Giving Women team for organizing this conference. My happiness is really being part of this because the topic we are talking about is one of those one that is extremely very close to my heart. My name is Fiesta Warinwa. I am a wildlife conservationist, and having worked in the wildlife sector for close to over 20 years, and with a lot of interest in the role of women in conservation of the environment beyond wildlife. I am currently involved in a couple of conservation women-led initiatives, and one of them is Women for the Environment Africa. We call it WE. And it's an initiative that we started with a couple of friends in the conservation circles here within East Africa and Southern Africa, and targeting women leaders on the continent and beyond. The second initiative is Wildlife Fund for Women. That's also a new one that I got involved in about 2 years ago. Again, women-led, myself and a lady from South Africa, another lady from Malawi and Ghana. And what we are basically doing is oversighting grants offered to women's projects in areas around wildlife protected areas. So currently I'm doing consultancies in community conservation within the East African region, mainly Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Somaliland. So my involvement with women and the applied started about 20 years ago when I was working for the African Wildlife Foundation in Kenya and in southern Kenya, northern Kenya and southern Kenya. And it was not an easy journey because back then conservation was not really, and especially community conservation was basically around national parks. And the idea of communities getting involved in conservation work and setting their land aside for conservation was really something new. And because it was a new shift for many of the conservation organizations, the African Wildlife Foundation decided that we should also now start looking at how does the organization engage in landscape conservation. So I happen to be one of the teams in Nairobi that ended up being deployed in one of the most remote areas in northern Kenya. And selling the idea of establishing community conservation areas to the communities was a very difficult task. First of all, I was a woman, and going to sell such an idea in a pastoral community where a lot of the discussions, first of all, you've got to look at the cultural aspect of things. You have to look at the tradition. So in most of the meetings I started, they were basically all men. The women would come and they would sit at the far back end of the meeting. And we would continue with the meeting, and they wouldn't say anything. And after like about 3 or 5 meetings, it struck me that the women would come and they would not say anything. And it started bothering me. I started asking myself, but why are the women not talking? So I spoke to one of the community leaders, and he told me, he said, Fiesta, you might know, and if you don't know, then you need to know that here things are done completely different. Yes, the women could come and attend those meetings, but sometimes it becomes very difficult even to say anything simply because the cultural norm would not allow them to speak in front of men, especially during community gatherings. And secondly, when it comes to inclusion in decision-making, the women are completely excluded. It's like they don't really matter. And the worst part of it was when it's a discussion that revolves around land and land ownership, which was so deeply ingrained in a patriarchal system. And then back then, the country didn't have, the laws never favored the women because it was always the men who owned the land, and the land ownership was basically. So it also bothered me, and I asked myself, so what do I really need to do? The first step I thought was maybe if I hold a side conversation with the women, they might be able to open up and tell me something that I really don't know. So I went ahead and said, okay, I will need to organize for a meeting with the women. And strangely, it worked. I had a meeting with them and I asked them why were they not talking? And they said, well, the culture really doesn't allow them to be able to speak in front of men. Yes, they would love to have that project up and about, but they still feel that the men would definitely dominate the discussion. And they came with very brilliant ideas. And with that, I said, okay, if we start something that specifically targets you as women, would you feel happy to go ahead with the project? And they said, absolutely. But funny enough, I still had to go and consult the men, seek their approval, and find out from them whether the project would be a good one. And they asked me, so what's this project all about? I said, it's not a very complex project. It's a very, very simple one. I would like the women to get into pasture production, because I feel that would be a big thing for them. Once they get into pasture production, of course, they don't own livestock. The farthest they do is they could probably own the small stocks, that's sheep and goat. And the men said, yeah, we would love to support them, but we'll decide when we'll get back to you with this idea, because it involves land. So I was extremely patient. And one of the things I learned was that you really, really have to be very patient with pastoral communities. So after 3 weeks, I almost gave up. So after 3 weeks, that's when they came back to me and they told me, yes, we have consulted among ourselves and we have agreed that we are going to give you a piece of land for the project. But we want to warn you at the same time that when we give you this piece of land, it does not necessarily mean the women own the land. And I said, no, it's just for purposes of the project. And hopefully something positive will come out of it. And they gave us the most degraded land in the area. And the women were so worried and they were asking me, Fiesta, are you really sure something is going to come out of this land? I said it will. Let's just be patient. Let's give ourselves time and let's wait and see what's going to happen. So we bought some grass seeds and started broadcasting the grass seeds in the degraded area just about 3 weeks before it started raining. So when it started raining, the whole land started, the grass started growing up, the area started regenerating, and the women were extremely happy. Then the men started coming back again and saying, oh, can you please allow us to graze a few cattle in there? And I told them, well, this is a women's project. I really don't have a say over it. It's the women who should have a say over it, and they can be able to make a decision as to whether they should allow the livestock to get in or not. And then eventually they came back to me and said, so what do you think? I said, we are going to start a business out of this. So the first business is to look for livestock and begin to fatten the livestock and take it to the market so that it becomes a source of income for you. And climate change was beginning to really, really bite very hard. You could harvest the pasture and even sell the pasture to the men. That's one way of you being able to generate some income for yourselves. So it became very clear, because one of the things that the men would always do during those hard, long, severe droughts, they would leave the women at home with children and the old ones, and they would take their livestock looking for grazing almost everywhere. And it became almost very difficult now. The burden was really left on the women to be able to take care of the families. So with that kind of approach, it became easy now for them to be able to raise that extra cash and have that extra income, so that then they can be able to take take care of the families. So one of the things that really, really inspired me was that there were 3 women in the group, and they were so dedicated and so determined. And that was where I really got my inspiration. And I said, if they're able to stick to the project and able to see up to the end of it, then that means we really need to hold each other. Their level of literacy was very low, but I think that motivation and that feeling that they really need to do something to make a difference, not just for them as a group of women from within a specific community, but to kind of place an example so that everybody else in the community is able to see the outcome. So the whole project became a game changer. And it became very fulfilling to me when I saw the initiative being replicated by different women groups in other landscapes, not just within the landscape that I used to work in, but through the whole entire country. So every part now, women are getting involved in land rehabilitation. They are getting into businesses that are livestock related because that's what they are very good at doing it. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, and then we'll continue with it again.
It's such a beautiful story. And I just want to ask one question. How were you able to get that replicated in other areas? What were the ways that what happened where you were working was able to be passed on?
One of the things we did was not just to kind of confine ourselves to one specific group. So that's one advantage that worked, I think, to our favor, because we had different groups. And the other thing I had to do also was to really go out of my way to kind of organize for some short trips for the different women groups so that they could talk to each other, they could learn from one another, and they can be able to see some of the work that they see it physically and practically. And talking to them. And the good thing is because most of them were really coming from the same community, they're able to exchange ideas and able to also explain to each other in their mother tongue, which made it a lot more easier for me. And so all I needed to do was ask them where they need me to help them talk to the men. That one, I would definitely do it for them without any doubts. And they knew that so well. So for anything, they would always say, no, you've got to talk to Fiesta, because the men would always listen to her. And the reason why the men listened to me was because they knew I was not from their community. I come from South Sudan, and I also come from a pastoral community. But the culture is still the same. It's not really so different. Only that with time, because the country has been in a state of war for so long. So a lot of us who managed to get out of the country and be able to see what's going out in the other parts of the world are able to now bring in the change that is required. So those are the steps that we had to take. And the leadership of the organization that I used to work with was also headed by a couple of women. And they were really very good, very supportive of the initiative. I would sometimes ask them to come out to the field and even talk to the women. And all the local women could see a lineup of women leaders. So from the top from my boss, the second boss, and myself, and it kind of gave them a lot of motivation that yes, it's not impossible. It's very possible to do that, but you just need to be patient, and you also need to be very courageous and very determined and committed as well.
And I think what's interesting is also, and we had this conversation, and maybe I'll go to Alice about this, is the navigation of the social norms. Maybe
yes,
you can say a little bit about that also. Is you would say, I don't know, we had this amazing conversation about, activism is not being angry. It's navigating.
It's literally navigating and going through it, but you have to be very tactful about it. And also being very calm and being very, and then give them a lot of audience. You listen a lot. And initially, I thought this was probably more of an East African problem, more of an East African problem, and more of probably a pastoral problem within the countries I've worked in. But interestingly, I was involved in a couple of projects in Somaliland, and actually discovered it's even worse in Somaliland, because it's not just the culture, but there is an element of religion that also comes in. So making it almost impossible for the women to come into certain discussions. About a couple of months ago, I was helping Cheetah Conservation Fund try to set up two community conservation areas in Somaliland. And one of the requirements from the donors was that Cheetah Conservation Fund needed to sign a free prior informed consent agreement with the communities. So when I started the first 2 meetings, they were all men. And the chiefs were there, the administrators were there. And I was asking, where are the women? And they said, oh, you know, it's going to be very hard for us to bring the women. I said, no, it's an international requirement. It's a national requirement. And it's a donor requirement that for this process to proceed, we must get the inputs of women into it. And it took me a bit of time to be able to convince them, because one, the cultural aspect of it was completely different, and then bringing religion into it even makes it more complex. But eventually they accepted the idea, and I said, okay, one of the conditions I'm going to put, and this is my own condition now, that when signing the agreement, we would like to have at least a couple of women involved in the signing of the agreement, because that's what will determine whether we proceed with the project or we don't proceed with the project. And eventually they accepted. So the 2 last meetings, they had to make sure they bring in the women. And I was seated there with the women and talking to them silently and telling them, you've got to push your way through, because if you don't do it, then it's almost going to be impossible. And I had a very, very good support from one of the Somali ladies. I think she was born in Somaliland, but then raised in the UK. And she's an environmental lawyer by profession. So she was telling me, Fiesta, we've got to help these women. If we don't help them, they still have a long way to go, but we still have to give them the support they need. And I told her, I said, yes, I lived in a country where we had those situations of religion coming into play when Sudan was still one country. And Islamic religion was Islamic laws were the laws that were governing the country at that time, before the country split. So I totally hear you where you're coming from, but yes, we've got to make sure that we do something about it. Otherwise, if we don't do something about it, nobody will do it, and the status quo will remain.
So I'd like to come to Alice now, because one of the things that we've said, it's so important to have women as leaders, women as part of the climate mitigation and adaptation crisis. And we've talked about different things, but Alice, I'd like you to tell us and give us an example, and particularly around education. What difference do women make? Why should we have women? What is it? I'm being provocative now. Why is it we should have women? And then I'm going to go to you, Zuna. So you're not off to talk about how the work that you've done have changed the way that conservation is done in Maldives as well. So I'm going to start with Alice.
Okay. So thank you very much. And a lot to pick up there from the discussions that we just had. And I want to first to go back to where I ended by talking about, I come back from Antarctica and I want to do something about women. I'm convinced by that trip, first and foremost, of my own personal obligation to do something, having seen the doors that opened for me, but also really having understood that women have a very strong role to play here. Women are Mother Nature, as you know. Women are closest to nature because of that. They are closest to, by being providers of their family. And especially when they live closer to natural resources, they have an obligation to protect those natural resources because they know the use of those natural resources. But when those natural resources start getting degraded because of climate change, they suffer the most. Mm-hmm. And therefore they have a big stake here because they are the ones who have to go farthest to look for water, to go farthest to look for firewood so that they can feed their family. But this also affects girls because what happens is that often it's the girls then who have to stay at home to help their mothers, and therefore they are kept out of school. And in some cultures, and this is an example that I want to bring up, that I found when I came back and I started looking around and seeing these links, is that in some cultures, these girls were also taken away and married off, because in this case, child marriage was used as a response to climate change, to make families, people to feed and benefit financially. That was one of their adaptation mechanisms, a perverse incentive. And so there was need to make sure that we address these issues. And I met a very
Can you
very
just go into a
inspirational.
little bit detail about how is it an adaptation method?
Well,
Either
it is a perverse adaptation method. In other words, when
a perverse, I understand, but what was the view behind it?
In those communities, what I found and what I was told, that in those pastoral communities, when there's a drought, marrying young girls off release families of the pressure that they would be facing.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was one of the adaptation, a perverse adaptation mechanism in that we cannot afford this anymore. So you're not going to go to school anymore. We're going to marry you off, and then we're going to get cattle back, and then we're going to use this with ourselves. And it was quite prevalent, actually. And I met a lady who inspired me, a climate leader, who was really going and pulling these girls out of those marriages and bringing them back home and finding scholarships for them to go back to school. And we really started supporting this program. Another thing that she was doing, which I found also interesting and linked to that, was she started this program called Cut the Cloth. Do not cut the cloth, not the girl. In other words, she was trying to push away the female genital mutilation practice in her village by giving people another option to say, let's work on a tailoring program that is about cutting the cloth and not cutting the girl. And I found all of those stories were very interesting. And there was, but behind all of this was a formidable leader. The group was called Il Matarak. Maybe Fiesta might know about this one. And it's up in northern Kenya. And they were pushing through in very difficult situations to support these girls and pull them back from these forced marriages. And we provided scholarships and also provided support to these empowerment programs. But importantly also was the advocacy that they were doing around the laws, the cultural bylaws, the national legislation to really stop this from happening. But I wanted to pick up a little bit also on Fiesta's point around We Africa, because We Africa, which is Women for Environment Africa, was a women leadership program that idea actually came from our Antarctica trip. And when I came back saying, but why is it that I'm only African on this trip? And how can we bring more African women into this leadership program? Because we need leaders. We need more leaders working to climate change. We talked about starting that Africa program, the We Africa program. And it is very impressive to see that this program has really started. It's grown. I think now it's in its 4th cohort. And it's a program that brings together women leaders who are ready, who need to work on, are ready and want to work on climate change, but they need to be equipped with leadership skills and stories. What I found interesting whenever I go to talk to them, the most thing that they're interested in is, what are those stories? What are you doing? How are you? Where are you struggling? How can we learn from you? They're looking for these, almost like what you're doing here at Atalanti with Giving Women, is bringing women to share stories of leadership, stories of courage, stories of hope. And I also wanted to touch on that cultural norms one that you talked about. That will be my last one. Yeah. I think Fiesta had a very good example of the women being in the room and saying nothing. And I had a similar example where we were trying to understand, what does resilience mean to you? And when you would ask the men, it was always about more money. It was always about more business. And when you'd ask the women what resilience meant to them, it was education. It was the water, that the water was actually running water, that there was no conflict within the neighborhood community. All important, but then different views from the men and from the women. And then realizing that if you didn't include the women in this conversation, you would miss that part of the conversation. You would go probably and have a program designed around providing more market access for cattle and others, and you'd forget that for them, it was water, it was girl education, and it was that. And I think it taught me the importance of understanding those cultural norms and factoring them into the work that we do. So really leadership, education, understanding that the systemic challenges when there's no access to water and you have to walk further distances, and how the girls then are forced to go into that, and then needing to really address that, was something that I really spent a lot of time thinking about and working on and supporting and through our programs. Now, you asked me, the last one is, which I will say, is you asked me about Fiji and Solomon Islands, and I remember that we did have that conversation. And that was an interesting one, because it was one where the women in Fiji were using their traditional cultural methods to do conservation better. And so even if we were coming in with, they wanted to establish a marine protected area, we had all the science around how you do that. And yet they said that, in our culture, we have something called taboo, where we bring our cultural leaders, we bring our religious leaders, and that helps us to work better. And really, our team in Pacific supported that, and they saw that actually working that way led in a way that brings together religious people, brings together cooperation and reduces conflict, actually resulted in more conservation outcomes than others.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, because in a way, everything that you've said is about bringing people together, learning from each other, sharing experiences, telling the stories to become even stronger in the work you're doing. And that's part of what leadership is having that ability to share. So there's wonderful connections in everything that you've said. I'm going to go back to Zuna now, and I'm going to, because I think that the fact of teaching swimming was not an end in itself. It really led to further impact. And I'd like you to just give us a little bit of granularity around that, if you can, Zuna. Thank you.
Ocean Women's purpose is to make the transformational benefits of the ocean available for women and girls all over the world for years to come, and to evidence and finding ways to overcome the barriers. And on the research aspect of the project, we learned that in our community, due to socio-economic changes in introduction of tourism, mothers get job opportunities, and they don't have the spare time to spend with their children, teaching them to swim or enjoy that free time in the sea. And these children don't get the chance to explore and have an idea of what the whole marine ecosystem is about. And mothers, we found that mothers, they themselves don't know how to swim, and they are reluctant to send their children near water out of overprotection and fear of drowning. And this vicious cycle has been going in our communities for years. And we learned that it is imperative to train female instructors, because in some of our communities, parents are hesitant to send their daughters to male swim teachers due to religious and cultural beliefs. And those parents who are hesitant to send would be more comfortable if there are mothers in the community who are willing to become swim instructors. So the girls get an opportunity to learn to swim, and those mothers could be the role models that the future generations can learn from. And
I know you were saying also that one of the things was that some of these girls then eventually would become custodians of the sea and protectors of the ocean bed. And you had a kind of wish that this was something that you could spread beyond the Maldives. And I thought that was extremely powerful when you were telling us about it. So that's really great. So I think, are there any questions, Kathleen, on the...
We have some questions in there. I think there were some questions that Qandeel answered around numbers that, of educational establishments they're working on.
I think the education part is really important, and the connection of climate change on education. It's not something that we actually really think about that often. Recently, UNICEF produced a report, and I'm sure that some of you have read it, around India that showed that 50% of adolescent girls are out of school in India. And one of the most fundamental factors of that is climate change.
Mhm.
And I think that, I think one of the purposes of this conference is to actually allow those connections to be made, and that's something that I hadn't thought about. I hadn't thought about the importance also of access to energy. And Qandeel, by presenting here the fact that you're in rural areas and the ability to actually create opportunities with solar and renewable energy in those areas will give access, but in a clean way. So there's so many aspects of that. And you talked also about water. Access to water is a big one. So do we have any other questions? Are there any questions?
Just wondering, there was, although I wasn't quite seeing if it was a question, but maybe it's one to sort of bring out that Godans from UNABU was bringing up about, obviously the importance of women being involved in the projects, but then how do we make sure that they also get the benefits from the project, right? Without there being a conflict with the men.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting
I
one.
think I have an interesting example on that one. I worked with a group of women in Nigeria once who were very, very, very entrepreneurial, I have to say, because Nigeria is a very entrepreneurial society. They had this very thriving spice business. And I asked them, how did you do this? How did you have such a thriving spices business? And they told me, by making sure that we wake up in the morning and first dig the garden, our husband's gardens. And then we take time off in the afternoon and we do our business. And there's no conflict because first thing in the morning. I thought that was very good. And there's so many examples of that. I remember even in Tanzania once I worked with a group of women, fisherwomen, and they were going to get an award because they had done so well. And they said, but we can't accept that award. I said, why? Only our husbands can accept the award. So the best thing is, if you're going to give us that award, we have to invite our husbands. And they say it with such a smile. Like it wasn't, they want to feel done by it. It's just that you have to understand the norms. That's how it works. And it is so inspiring when you find these communities who embrace these norms, because sometimes the narrative is that there are cultural barriers that take women backwards. But it's not always the case. It's not always the case. It's they know how to live in their societies. They know how to work around their societies, and this is why we have to work and meet them where they are. But I also wanted to pull up to talk about. I liked Zuna's story the first time I heard it because it reminded me of a friend of mine who'd done a PhD in marine science from a landlocked country. And I also come from a landlocked country. I come from Uganda. And then she said, Alice, the day I saw the ocean, the day I went under that sea, is the day that I saw my entire PhD. And so you can't be what you can't see, right? And Zula, your story is always exciting because I always think about it and I'm like, you took those girls under the water and you made them see what is under the water. And they became more appreciative of it. And I think those role models, and like I said, with We Africa, we talk about this and we talk about that those stories are what give everybody hope. The role modeling in women leadership is extremely important. And really, I thank you, Atalanti, for this, for giving us an opportunity to hear these excellent examples.
Thank you for sharing. I think we have a question from Megan.
Yes, thank you, Atalanti and Kathleen and everyone who put this together, and to our wonderful speakers. And Alice, you sort of touched a little bit on the question I had, which was, I've worked in Ethiopia with local NGOs trying to help empower women, and especially in further out regions, the idea of female genital mutilation and child marriage. What we discovered is that first you had to address the elders and the men, and you also had to address the elder women. So I was curious in hearing your experience of how, it sounds a little bit like hand-holding, but for the women who need to deal with traditional values and expectations, did you have any tips on how to approach the elder men in ways that they would allow the women to, do the land or do whatever, get education or explore. I don't know if you have any tips and if it's applicable to all cultures, but it may be interesting for those of us trying to work in those areas.
You're on mute.
I wouldn't say that I have tips or that I'm an expert, but what I have found is that most times these women know what to do. They have the tips themselves. They know how to maneuver in these areas. You just have to be there and support them somehow to take their leadership in these spaces. Because obviously Fiesta had a good example where she came in as an outsider and pushed the boundaries. And I think Fiesta, you may have a good answer here for Meg. But I've always found that even in these very autocratic spaces, when you find some time and have a side conversation with women, they have a lot of wisdom on how they want to overcome these things. If you just have to ask them, how can I support you? And you support them to do that.
Yeah, let me just add by saying that one of the things I think I had to do was to request for a community conservation officer at that time. He was very elderly, and the communities were also able to listen to him. So in some of the meetings that we would go and attend together with him, one of the approach I had to use was to kind of send him ahead, maybe a day before the meeting starts, just for him to be able to kind of pick the vibes and then also talk to the elderly and listen to to what they are suggesting. And then he briefs me so that by the time I'm meeting the men, at least I already have an idea of what approach and how I should approach the whole process. And they also have a very interesting thing about them as men, that sometimes when they reach a certain point where they're not able to make a decision, they would say, we would like to go and talk to the skins. So when they say they go talk to the skins, they're actually going to consult their women at night. So when it's over dinner time, it's almost bedtime, that's when they will start asking, we had this meeting and we seem not to have agreed on something solid, or we were not able to reach a decision. So what do you think? What's your opinion? So then the women give them their views. And it's that moment when they come back to the meeting for the second time, you kind of see them changing completely. Now, the community officer would always tell me that when they don't make their decisions immediately at that particular point, it means they have to talk to their wives first. And the wives have very brilliant ideas. So the wives would then advise them. Then by the time they come, the meeting wouldn't even take 2 hours. In an hour's time, they would all say, yeah, we have agreed. And I think we just need to move forward with the project. So at some point, yes, they would always appreciate. And the women, as Alice said, also have their own way of navigating and talking to the men. But it's not a straightforward process that you go and say, I want this, and you get an answer immediately. No, it doesn't. It doesn't work that way. It's always a very slow process. They have a very diplomatic way of digging in and trying to be able to get solutions to their problems.
I remember in one of our discussions, somebody said, women are patient. And it's patience and that resilience.
Yeah.
To the next thing. And that was really interesting. Qandeel, I wanted to come to you and see if you have a particular story of a young woman that's been educated and what's happened, that you can tell a success story. And you have your hand up as well, so go on.
Yes. I just build up on Alice's point first. When she said that most of the times women have the solution for this, I'll first go to that point and then I'll get to the success stories. The victims of social injustice have usually the greatest energy to change that system for others. They don't want others to suffer the way they did. So one of our volunteers, she was a teacher at a school. She was a victim of marital abuse, physical abuse, and she came to me and said that she wanted to change things. Now, we are going to start another module in Solar for Her, which is educating young children about climate change and renewable energy. So, making a very child-friendly curriculum or seminar material, very child-centric material for the children to understand basically what renewable energy technologies are. And I handed her over that job, and she did it so well. Like, she introduced all the uh she like, it was a complete activity based seminar. So these women are really strong. They have a lot of energy, and they don't want others to suffer the way they do, and they are really ready for action. So that's a story from my end. And then the success story that you asked about. Um, there is an area in Pakistan. Well, I have quite a few stories, but I'll tell two stories. One is from the northern area of Pakistan, which is very mountainous. I guess you have heard about it. It's K2, the second biggest mountain of Pakistan. So that area has very like, the government doesn't access has no access there. The main national grid has no access there. So a lot of students get affected from because of no electricity there. We solarized in one of those schools. We solarized a computer lab, and that really changed the level of education for girls there, because there was no computer in the whole village before that. They had computers, but there was no electricity, so basically no computers at all. And then I have another story from the desert of Thar Parker, which is extreme south of Pakistan. That's a complete desert. And the schools there in those villages are mud huts. So another NGO, they built schools for them, and we solarized those schools to make the education system better. So that way, the whole community got that benefit. The whole community, for the whole community, the level of education changed completely, because then they had a full, proper building with desks and chairs and electricity.
Thank you. Yeah. And that, again, the partnership, working with other people, and then we have much, much more impact in the work that we do. So that's really great. Any more questions that out there? Kathleen? You see anything? You see any
Questions? I see some wonderful
Yeah, it's a wonderful
comments.
comment.
Everybody's really found this, so enriching and
So I just want to ask one more question, then we'll close up, is, in terms of women's leadership, and obviously this is something that we all talk about a lot. What are the hurdles in actually really making this a reality and something that's authentic, not just something that is, okay, we have 5 women at the table, but are they really participating? Are they really being heard? Is their voice being listened to? Maybe Alice or Fiesta.
I'll give it a go.
You'll give
I'll
it a
give it
go.
a go, and then others should give it. And it's a story I didn't talk before, but I think one of the biggest hurdles has always been around how we have treated the gender mainstreaming. I think we've tended to make it about numbers, right? Let's have, as you said, let's have more women in a committee. Let's make sure we include women. Let's make sure we recruit women. But we have not always told the story about when you actually have the women, the difference they make, the difference it makes. And I have one story of the women rangers, because I think this is one of those fantastic stories that we who work in conservation have seen, the difference of when you work with male rangers versus women rangers. In Mozambique is a good example, where in the Gorongosa, after the war, the animals had been depleted, and they were really trying to get the wildlife back into the park. And they first had the male rangers there to deal with the poachers, and it was guns, and it was guns, and it was fighting, and it wasn't going well. And then one day they brought the women. And when they brought the women brought a different kind of approach to this. They brought a collaborative approach. They brought a problem-solving approach. They brought a conflict resolution approach. There were no guns. They just was working with the communities, dealing with human-wildlife conflict, and listening. And when you talk to the people there, they say these women were the most powerful thing that ever happened to that national park, and that the success that they have now is because of the women and the way women work versus the way that they would have worked with men. And I think telling those stories in terms of when you have more women researchers, the science is better. When you have one, that it is better. So it's not just about the numbers. It is about the impact that it creates when you have women, the difference that they bring to the table, that when you have women. And I think that should be more frontful. I think it will help in making people see that it's not just about affirmative action. It's actually more about that things are better when you have women at the table.
And telling their stories and telling the stories.
Telling their stories.
Fiesta, you wanted to say something?
Yes, yeah, let me just add to what Alice has said. Yes, it's very true that the hurdles are still there. But I think one way of going around the hurdle is that we need to build more champions. We need to build more champions, and those champions should be built at all levels. So starting, say, from the grassroots levels all the way up, because it's only after we build a good number of them, then we can begin to talk about accelerating this transformative climate action that we are talking about. We need to empower them as well so that they're able to claim their environmental rights and actively, and as Ali said, it's not just about the numbers. It's about making sure that, first of all, we build their confidence, get them to engage and actively participate in some of the climate action decision-making processes. Yes, at the national level, yes, we have a few of them, but at the grassroots level, we are still very far from that. The other thing is also to be able to build their capacity to be able to adapt to climate change. And then lastly, probably the appeal I would probably make, and that's not just for organizations that deal with climate change, but even individuals who are involved in climate change, to just make a deliberate effort in incorporating investment in health, gender, education, and empowerment of women in the climate change space. Because without that, it's going to be almost very, very difficult, especially those at the grassroots level. It's going to take them a long, long time to be able to get through that because of the other different factors we talked about, the cultural norms. The literacy level of the women are still extremely low. Everything around the region is pegged on land. The women still don't own land. And yeah, so it's a very slow process, but we've got to start from somewhere.
Yeah, and I think this is exactly the reason why we are holding this conference. So these stories can be told and that we really hear what's happening at the grassroots level, because these are the women that are having to adapt to climate change and to deal with the effects of climate change. So I think we're slowly coming to an end. I would just like Zuna maybe to say one thing about how swimming has changed the lives of some of the women in terms of their inner being.
I'd like to add to what Fiesta just mentioned. Ocean Women Project's aim is to create a document which outlines the key learnings from the project and which can be replicated by coastal communities with similar challenges and help them overcome their challenges. So any support towards achieving this would immensely be appreciated, as this document could inspire, empower women and girls globally through the story shared by similar women just like them.
Thank you, Zuna. That's beautiful. So Qandeel and Alice, just one last comment, a call to action, a message you would just want to leave the audience with, Qandeel, and then we'll go to Alice.
Yeah, my call to action is let's join hands, let's collaborate to solve the issue of climate and women issues, like overall women issues, to make a better future. We are leaving 50% of the world population, and we cannot solve any problem without leaving out the women. So let's collaborate in any way possible to to empower these women and do climate action on our own, because there's no planet B.
Thank you, Qandeel, and I leave you the last word,
Oh,
Alice.
yeah, great. I will say so. I will talk about something I had and link it to this. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and someone told a story about a helicopter pilot who was injured, badly injured in Afghanistan, and he had to be brought home to be treated. And he wasn't really well enough, but said he wanted to go back. And they said, why? Why would you want to go back? You are so badly injured. And he said, when the soldiers who are injured see the helicopter lights flying down, even when even if they cannot, even when they can't move, it gives them hope. And so I think we should be those helicopter lights. Let us be the beacons of hope for the women of the world who need us to work for them, to be their inspiration. And Qandeel, your solar story, Fiesta, your story, Zuna, your story, all those are beacons of hope. And let's continue through your Giving Women work and through your Giving Women conference to be the beacons of hope for all the women who need us, so that we can lift each other. Thank you very much.
All I can say now is an enormous thank you to the four of you. That was a beautiful ending. It was really what we're all about. And we hope to all be beacons of hope and move forward and give those women who are leaders inside of them that opportunity to move forward. So thank you so much. This has been really
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And I hope
you for having us.
Meet you all at some
Thank
point.
you all.
Sure.
So much.
Yeah, I hope you all join us on the 3rd. You know, you have all the access details for all the panelists. So we really want you to join us online on the live stream.
Sure.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so
Okay,
much, all
thanks.
participants.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Bye-bye.